Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast to help you and your family cruise a little smarter. And Christy is on a phone call. She's going to interrupt us at some point as we start our show, but I want to welcome to the show today Lauren from the beautiful West Coast. How are you doing today, Lauren?
Great. It's a good morning to be talking with you.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning. We're up early and doing a little podcasting. So hopefully you got your coffee and you're ready to go.
Yep, no coffee for me, but I'm ready to go.
Okay, yes, it's one of my habits, I guess. So, well, I'm pretty excited about this topic. Now, we have talked to two different people who have done transatlantic cruises, and you kind of reached out, and you have actually done both the eastbound and the westbound transatlantic cruise, and kind of wanted to touch on maybe some of the differences. And I think this is one of those cruises that I think a lot of us would love to do. Just timing-wise, it's hard to do. But before we jump into the cruise itself, why don't you give a little bit of a background, like your Disney background? How did you get into Disney? Do you go to the parks? And how did you find Disney Cruise Line?
Sure. So Jason, my husband, grew up going to the parks quite a bit. I did not. I was one of those kids that watched Disney movies, but that was the extent of my Disney knowledge. And after we got married, he convinced me to go spend a day in Disneyland, which I was sure was just for kids, and I wouldn't like. And 20 minutes in, I was completely hooked, and we started to become park hounds. We've been to Disneyland, we've been to Walt Disney World, a bunch of times, and then we even made it out and did Tokyo Disneyland. And so we were kind of looking for a break from the parks. As much as we love them, sometimes it's a lot of vacationing. It can be, exhausting at the end of a park week. And so we thought, well, we've always wanted to go to Alaska. How do we do that? We kind of looked, and cruising seemed to be the best way, but we really didn't think we'd be cruise people. We really didn't think we'd like it, but we figured Disney did cruising, so we couldn't hate it too much at least, and at least we could see Alaska that way, and it would be our one and done cruise. Like 3 days into Alaska, we had our first transatlantic cruise booked.
I think that is such a similar story to so many of us. I didn't go kicking and screaming, but it wasn't like high on our bucket list when we took our kids down to Disneyland in 2013. And we kind of had that same experience. It was just like a magical vacation. The kids had a blast, and we kind of got hooked as well. And kind of had that same experience with cruising when we went with friends over to the Mediterranean as well. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Okay, well, before we dive a little bit further into the show, I'd like to welcome back to the show our co-host, Christy from Pack Your Pixie Dust. How did today, Christy?
I'm sorry for being late. And you know what? I was doing a travel agent thing, so this is just... And actually, I had a little legal matter I had to deal with before. So this is one of those days where I'm just trying to, fit it all in. Wow. So I'm doing well.
Awesome.
It's been a busy morning, and it's only 10:14.
Look at that. So we'll keep the travel theme going. Christy, say hi to Lauren. Lauren, Christy.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Christy. Good to talk with you this morning.
You as well.
So we were just talking, Christy, about Lauren and her husband's experience as they went up to Alaska for the first time, got hooked with Disney Cruise Line, and then you guys booked a transatlantic cruise. So I got to ask, I guess, why the transatlantic? I mean, you went from, I don't want to cruise, let's do the 7-day to Alaska, and then, boy, let's do a 13-night or the 10-night, either way.
Because it's awesome, for one, right? Is that the answer?
Pretty much. We did go from Alaska to the 13-night. As I was researching Alaska, I'm sort of a crazy researcher. I think I got a degree in Disney Cruise Line before I even stepped on the ship the first time. And so I had kind of seen people talk about the transatlantic and thought, wow, if you like it, that's awesome. You get to go to Europe, you get to be on a ship for a week. But since we're probably not going to like it, I think, that's just sort of out there. Well, after the Alaska cruise, we had, a sea day, and then it had Tracy Arm Day, which is basically a sea day. And we pretty much knew at that point, we love this whole idea. And we booked a placeholder on that cruise, knowing that we kind of wanted to do about 2 years later, a transatlantic. And so as soon as those became available on opening day, we booked that 13-nighter.
I'm so jealous.
I get that reaction a lot. People were really surprised that was the second cruise we did.
Who all traveled on this cruise? Or on these cruises?
So it's just myself and my husband, Jason. We like to cruise kind of as a couple. We don't have any kids, and so we go off adventuring on our own.
That sounds a little lovely. I'm not going to lie.
So you booked this. It was 2 years later, you said, from Alaska?
It was 2 years minus a week.
Okay. Did you do anything in between then as far as cruising goes? Obviously, not with Disney. Did you try any other cruise lines? Were you tempted to do that at all?
No, we've only done Disney. I still am not sure I would like cruising with anybody else. I think the reasons we didn't like the idea of cruising still sort of exist, but Disney sort of makes all of that disappear for us.
Let's just kind of turn to the transatlantic cruises then, and we'll kind of go through kind of some differences between the two since you've done both the eastbound and the westbound. You know, when you looked at the eastbound cruise, it's 13 days and you get to Europe. Was your idea just to do the cruise or was it to spend some time in Europe as well?
Initially, we had the eastbound and the westbound. We were comparing them, and we picked the eastbound because we figured we had no interest in the ports. Neither of us really had any burning desire to go to Portugal or Spain. So we figured this is a great way to go. We'll enjoy the 6 sea days that we get, and then we'll kind of do sort of whatever in the ports. Again, Disney changed our mind. We ended up loving Spain and Portugal. But that was sort of how we picked between the two because we had wanted to spend a lot of time in England and Ireland. And when you do a transatlantic cruise, you're really limited. You have 8 hours, maybe 10 in each port. And so we felt like, well, we didn't care about the ports on the eastbound, so that was the one to go with. That it really wasn't anything complicated reason why we picked that one.
That's what I love, though, about cruising is that you experience these cities that maybe you had no desire to go to or didn't think you had a desire to go to. It was off of your radar, and then you got there and you loved it.
Exactly. I didn't even know where the Azores were. I had to look it up. I'm like, where are we going exactly on this cruise? I don't know. And then really ended up, I am dying to go back to Lisbon after this cruise and actually stay in Lisbon and kind of vacation there more than the 8 hours we had. But that was why we picked the eastbound first. And plus it's 13 nights. And it's 6 sea days in a row. Who doesn't want 6 sea days where there's nothing to do and no one?
At this very minute, I would give anything for that right now.
Me too. And I just got back from one.
Well, did you guys spend any time then in Europe afterwards then? Or did the cruise take up the majority of your vacation time this time?
Unfortunately, it did take up the majority of our vacation time. 13 nights plus your travel back and our travel out to Miami in the first place kind of burned up our what we can really take for one vacation. There was people on our cruise, though, that had done like a cruise before the transatlantic. And then we're doing a cruise after the transatlantic. They were staying on the ship or they were staying in Europe for 3 weeks. And man, that sounded awesome. But 2 weeks was about as much as we could really kind of squeeze out of vacation time.
Yeah, if you have the time, because it flows right into a 7-night Mediterranean cruise, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? You get that, the nice sea days and going through Spain and Portugal, and then you get to do your lap around the Med before you go back, if you can put those two together. So that would be right in my bucket list someday.
To be fair, I know people did it on the cruise, but by the time the 6 sea days are awesome, you're totally relaxed, you're chill, and then you do the Azores, Ponta Delgada, and then you have one more sea day, and then it's port, off. And so by the time we were off in Barcelona, we were exhausted. We stayed one extra day to see Barcelona, but that was kind of it. And man, I was so tired after that vacation. I needed another vacation because the second half is really, if you're getting off and seeing the cities, is super port intense. There's not a break from Tuesday, and this one it was a Tuesday through we got off Saturday. It was just a port every single day.
Well, you make a really good point there, because once you get into the Mediterranean too, that's port. So you definitely need some time off. I want to go back. I think, and I don't know, I know that we did a cruise. Our first European cruise was up to Norway, and it was the first cruise after the Magic had come across the Atlantic, and they had gone across the north part of the Atlantic. And I remember, and I know you've got some notes a little bit later, we'll talk about it, about a hurricane, but I remember talking to the cast members on the ship, and also a couple of people that had stayed on, and they said that they had like 3 days of the worst crossing weather that they'd ever had. Like they literally were stuck in their rooms. The plates were flying everywhere. And since then, Disney has gone on a southern route, And I think that I mean, I'm just guessing here. I'm thinking that the weather's got to be a lot better south, and I think that's a smarter move on their part to stay south rather than the North Atlantic in May.
Well, now that I've done the north and the south route, I have to also agree. The southern route was gorgeous. It was glass the whole 13 nights of sailing. There was no waves. There was no rain. It was sunny and anywhere between 65 and 75. It was gorgeous cruising weather. We are not hot weather cruisers. I don't want to go sweat on the ship. And so we loved it being like that was comfortable. You could lay out at the pool. The pools were heated, so people were swimming all the time. We do not go in the pools, but we enjoyed them from a distance. My idea of the pool is to see how fast I can walk past it towards the free ice cream. But that was the southern route going down from Miami and then through the Azores was really nice. And in fact, I got to take that route again on the westbound unintentionally. But I would definitely say
because of the storm.
Yeah, because of the storm that I know we're going to talk about. But I got to have some of the north, and I was really glad when we turned south. I have to be honest, because that northern crossing is not for the faint of heart.
Definitely sounds like it's not for me then. So I'll have to do that. I'll have to keep that research going.
When the cast members are saying it was rough, then it was really rough. So, well, let's just turn into the cruises itself. We'll just kind of go over some of the differences and stuff. Now, you did the Wonder up to Alaska. Of course, the European ship is the Magic. Love the Magic, by the way. What were your thoughts about the differences of the ship? They're kind of, sister ships, but any thoughts about the overall differences between the Wonder and the Magic that you'd noticed?
It felt like home. We wondered what it would be like going from the Wonder to the Magic, but there's definitely differences, and we've fallen in love with the Magic too. I think besides where it goes, I don't know, there's something special about the Magic that I just can't put my finger on why we like it better than the Wonder, because they are super, super close. But when we walked on the Magic, I knew where everything was. I had spent 7 days on the Wonder, and all the big stuff's in the same place. So it was really cool just kind of going around. When we got on the Magic for the eastbound, they had just put in Rapunzel's table. So that would been running I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks by the time we got on. So that was brand new and exciting. And that, it was their first themed restaurant. So that had been a change. But otherwise, it just felt like we had come back to our Disney home.
I don't know if it's because of where the Magic goes to, and there's a little I don't know, aura about it because of that, or if it's just the first ship, but I think everybody kind of resonates to it for some reason.
For each of your cruises, did you have the same cabin type and location, or at least at each of your transatlantic cruises, or did you mix it up? Where did you stay?
So for both the transatlantics, we had the exact same cabin area, and we were one cabin apart. We couldn't get the same one as the eastbound on the westbound, but we were the next door cabin. So we book what is the family ocean view veranda stateroom. It's really a long name.
So the largest veranda cabin.
We did book the largest veranda cabin. We did do an inside in Alaska, which we were perfectly fine with, but we figured on the 13 nights the first time, we thought we'd want a little more space to kind of spread out and sort of be. And with all those sea days that we'd hang out on the balcony, which we spent a ton of time on our balcony during those 6 sea days, we figured the veranda was worth it. And honestly, the cost for a veranda on a transatlantic is really reasonable. Every time I look at any other cruise and see the veranda price, I'm like, no way. But the transatlantics are, honestly, it's a really reasonable price compared to the rest of the veranda rooms on other cruises.
I love that cabin category as well. In was it our first cruise? I think it was my first Disney cruise. We were able to have that cabin, and I just felt like there was a lot of space, and it just felt nice for people that are going to spend some time in the cabin to be cozy, if you will, or to not be cozy, but to not be on top of each other, but to be you're not crammed in there. You can actually spend time in that cabin.
Yeah, exactly. Which we hadn't even seen one, obviously, when we booked it the first time, but we just knew that the inside was great for the cruise where we weren't in the cabin at all. But if we were going to spend a lot of time in there, that was a little cozier than we wanted.
It's good to hear that you were able to take a lot of use out of the veranda too. I think that's maybe why some people kind of question it. Should we spend the money? But like you said, it's the difference isn't that bad. And with the seas being as nice as they were in your southern one, what just a magical time to be able to sit out there, read a book, have some coffee, whatever it is that you want to do, and relax and watch the sea go by.
One thing that I guess I didn't know until I cruised that I I guess the listeners might find helpful is that the sunset's pretty late on that eastbound transatlantic specifically. And so, sunset was around 9 o'clock every night, roughly, kind of depending on where we were in the sea. And so you would finish dinner, you could, go out on your veranda and watch the sunset and just kind of chill out and relax. And it was gorgeous. Even the weather was good enough that you could be out there at 10 o'clock at night and it wasn't freezing kind of at all. It was a really good use of the veranda. I am not sure I would book the veranda on the westbound though, again.
And tell us why.
Because the weather is a lot different. It's cold and it's windy and it's miserable. and besides the fact that we ended up having to go around a hurricane, even at the very beginning, other than the two ports at the very front end of the westbound, I went on the veranda, I think the second to last day when we finally got close to New York and it was comfortable again. But it was cold and windy and nowhere I wanted to sit.
Just looking at the paths, I mean, you're pretty far south in the Atlantic when you leave Miami heading towards Portugal versus when you leave Dover, head towards Cork, Ireland, and then head across. So it doesn't seem like that much when you look at it on a map, but that's a big difference as far as weather patterns and everything else. So I totally understand that. So let's talk a little bit about the food. And you talked about Rapunzel's Royal Table. I'd like to get your opinions on that. What do they do with the food? With being on board this long, do they rotate the menus? Do they add anything different? What were your kind of experiences?
They have basically the standard 7-night menu, and then they have a bunch of extra menus. Like they have one that's called the Transatlantic that I can't even remember what's on it, honestly, but they've got just a slew. Especially, I remember when we got our key card on the first Transatlantic, and you look at your dining rotation, and that's when you realize how long you're at sea, because it was like Arla, 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 Arla. Ours was, Animator's Palette, Rapunzel's, and Lumiere's, and it just went on and on and on the key card, and you kind of wonder if there's going to be, anything by the end of the cruise that you haven't eaten. But honestly, every night had, some of the same standard dishes with a different taste. There was always a chicken dish. There was usually a steak dish. And then they really changed it up. I never ended up eating anything twice or really, having anything on the menu that was like, oh man, we've seen that before. They're really creative with what they do with the ingredients, because especially that first 6 days, there's no restocking.
Right. They have to have everything they need for the entire cruise. That is the one thing that I'll say is good on Disney versus other cruise lines. When we were on Princess last summer, the menu rotated like every 3 days, and the children's menu only had the same 4 items for the entire cruise. They didn't even bother pretending to change the menu. It was the exact same menu that they gave every single night. I guess the disadvantage to Disney is that if you do a 3 or a 4 night, you are eating the exact same, you're offered the exact same options, because they only use those menus on every cruise has those 3 and 4 nights worth of menus. So if you go on a 7-night, you still have those 4-night menus. But on the Panama Canal and on the Transatlantic, I love that they mix them up. And I think that's great for us cruisers who actually want to enjoy the different food and stuff. We make the exact same food at my house for dinner every week. I swear it's like rotation. It's chicken, this, and pork chop. And we are uncreative. So it's nice that the cruise line can be creative so that we can experience that while we're at sea.
Yeah, I think one thing after now doing both is it is the same menus for both. Obviously, they pull out 3 for a 10-night versus a 13, but it was the exact same menu, which was great when those little purses with mushroom in them and Animator's Palette showed up, because, I always order 2. But it wasn't great when I got one of the menus that I didn't love everything on it. But it is the same menus on both Transatlantic. So if you love it, great. If you're like, oh, that menu's not my favorite, well, go somewhere else that evening, because they will use kind of the same 2 for those trips.
Did you mix it up at all and go to Cabanas one night, or did you take in Palo as well?
So we did Palo for dinner on the eastbound. I've never done Cabanas for dinner. I will say Cabanas for breakfast, if you like a lot of variety on a 13-night, it's really the same breakfast. I mean, they may throw in a dish or 2, but it's kind of a standard, eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, fruit, muesli. There's a lot of variety, but that really didn't change throughout the cruises. Breakfast was sort of breakfast at Cabanas.
Although, how many options for breakfast are there? You know what I mean? Like, I guess that would be the only thing is.
No, exactly. I mean, they would change up the flavor of the French toast. They change up the flavor of the waffles and the pancakes and that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for variety for breakfast, not so much. But we never had a problem. We were perfectly happy. Just like you, I eat the same food every single week, and I have the same breakfast, 5 days a week. So it didn't really bother us. But breakfast is the only meal I think that there isn't a ton of changing. But otherwise, especially on the westbound, I think we noticed a big step up in food around the pool decks this time. They changed out the options a lot more than they did on the eastbound. We had a lot more variety. Duck and Dine had like different specials every day. And, they were chili dogs and like chili hamburgers, or they'd have some sort of steak. I'm a vegetarian. And so the Duck and Dine has a veggie option that changed every day. And that was great because it wasn't just on the eastbound. We had sort of had, well, you can have the burger and it's still the same burger and it's still the same burger. On this westbound, they had really kind of stepped it up, and they had the burger every day, but they also had a vegetarian special and a non-vegetarian special that they rotated. So I saw a kind of a big improvement in the pool deck food between the two cruises.
Well, I got a couple random questions before we talked about like entertainment and some of the ports. How many people would you say were on both of these cruises? Do you have a sense as far as how full the ship was?
It's about half full. I know they told us the exact number. The number I remember from both cruises, because it was almost exactly the same, is how many kids are on the ship. And it's 400, roughly.
That still feels like so many.
It does, except I never saw any kids on either cruise. I don't know where they stashed them, but they weren't on the ship.
I think back to my Celebrity cruise last January. There were under 30. I believe it was like 29 or 30 children under the age of 18, which I realize Celebrity is not made for kids, but under 30. And on a transatlantic where you're gone for 2 weeks and you're crossing oceans and you're missing, they're always during the school year and you're missing school, there were still 400.
So from the families that we did meet on Port Adventures and stuff, it seemed like a lot of them were families that homeschooled. Mm-hmm. And that was, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't everybody, but from the ones we met, that kind of seemed to be the trend. Most of the staterooms are 2 adults. So, and that's it. I would say the age demographic is definitely on the older side.
Well, because it's the same concept, right?
Exactly.
Who can take 2 weeks off work?
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely, I mean, if you're looking at it and you're not in the retired and sailing age group, there are definitely people, us included, on this cruise that do not fit that. And there was always, it's a range, but the majority are definitely on the more retired or semi-retired kind of age bracket for the cruises.
I kind of want to hold on to that thought. Let's come back to that when we talk about entertainment. The other random question I had was time zones. So going east, you're losing an hour every day. Going west, you're gaining an hour. What were your thoughts between the two that way?
Oh, man, that eastbound almost killed us. Eastbound, you change times 6 times. And I think 4 or 5 of them were right in a row. So literally every single night, you're losing an hour. It was awful.
So then eventually you're eating dinner at like 1 p.m.
Okay, so by about, I think it was like the 5th sea day, so we've changed times 4 or 5 times. Our dining team, they work in cabanas, and they say, oh, we're going to see you for breakfast. We're like, we're not really breakfast people, but, we might make it before it closes. We're on vacation. I do not want to get up for a 7 a.m. breakfast. Not interested. And so server would always ask us, are we going to see you? And by the 5th day, there were so few people going to breakfast at cabanas at the early hours that they actually changed the opening hours, which I don't know if they've done before, but the cruise seemed like really surprised because no one was going to breakfast till 10:30 or 11. And it was a mad rush for that last 30 minutes cabana was open. And so they ended up opening breakfast, I think at 9 and keeping it open till 11:30 because you had changed time zones 5 times and 11 was still, I don't know, like 4 a.m. it felt like.
Well, especially coming from the West Coast too. So when you add that in there,
I have never slept till noon on a cruise until this cruise.
Just, skip breakfast, just call it brunch.
You were asking about entertainment later. I don't know what happened for those last couple sea days in the morning because I missed it. I was in bed, and I think most of the ship was in bed.
Well, then what about going westbound? Did you find, it was easier that way because you're gaining an hour every day?
Yes. And I think because it's broken up a little bit more. You're on the ship for 2 days and you don't change times, and then you change a couple. And it's funny, because of the hurricane, I can't speak to exactly when they changed the times on a normal one, because we sort of changed our route and when our times were going to changed. But it was still, when we had kind of looked at it before we went, it's broken up. You only have to change five hours, so it's one less. And it was a little bit like, you do one here, have a break, do one here, and you're gaining an hour. So, I actually made it to breakfast on this cruise. When people find out we've done it, the two questions I get asked all the time are, how are the time changes and how are the sea days? Are they boring? And I can't lie about the time changes. They're rough. I think the eastbound was so much worse for us than the westbound. I did not feel off or really like that westbound. It barely even registered, honestly. Somehow changing those hours and gaining an hour, just like, whatever, fine, sure. Yeah, flip the clock. They put the little note in front of it and okay, the time changed. But man, that eastbound, even Jason says, when we talk about like, would we do these again? He's like, that eastbound the ports are awesome, but that time change is so rough.
So here's what I've heard so far. This is my recap. Steve is usually the recap guy, but I'm stepping in this time. The westbound is cold and windy. However, the time changes are easier. The eastbound has the most lovely weather, but the time change is cruel.
Pretty much. That sums it up. Yeah.
You're like weighing. It's like good and bad, right? You have to decide which one is worse.
You kind of got to bite the bullet on one end or the other, right?
It's kind of the same way with flying too. Most people traveling eastbound is really tough on them. Going westbound's a lot easier. And I'm looking at like day 8 on yours when you get to the Azores into Portugal, and the shore time is 7:30 a.m. So holy cow, that's.
Oh, we had actually booked a port adventure through Disney, and I think we had to be in our lounge at like 6:30.
Oh, geez. What were they thinking?
I don't know, but we made it. I think we had ordered room service, and I remember this poor room service guy was delivering our food at like 5 a.m. I felt so bad, but it was the only way we could, grab coffee, juice, and a couple of pastries before getting off the ship, because we had to be down there so early. It was that really was kind of the end of the big chunk of the time changes. We changed one more time between Portugal and Spain. And yeah, there was a lot of really sleepy people on that port adventure for the first hour or two.
Hopefully it wasn't a long bus ride, because I think everybody would have been asleep. Or maybe that would be a good thing, so you could get a little bit more sleep. But well, let's turn to entertainment then. And you guys are a little bit younger, traveling without kids. What were the crowds like at maybe some of the adult-themed entertainment? Was there many people out participating in it? Did you guys participate in it? What were your thoughts on the entertainment?
Yeah, so surprisingly, on both of the cruises, there was a lot of people out in the evenings. I think more so on the westbound because we were awake and not wiped out from the time changes. But in general, most of the people on the cruise don't have kids, and so they can go to those late night entertainment options because there's no one to have to put to bed. And so whether it was, our age bracket or the slightly older or even the slightly younger, the entertainment was pretty well attended in the late evenings. I'm talking, the 10 to midnight. We would do a lot of the adult only shows like Match Your Mate, or they do some, I guess, specialty or more rare game shows and stuff on these longer cruises because they have to fill, 10 or 11 nights of stuff. One night they did, I don't even know what to call it, like a weird game show where everybody was involved, but nobody won. And it just fun stuff like that. So we would end up at those. Obviously, we really enjoy, or at least I do, and Jason tolerates the big Broadway production shows. And so we would go to Tangled and Dreams and Be Our Guest. And I feel like I'm missing one.
Did they do Tangled more than once?
No, not on either cruise. I mean, they do it twice in that one evening, but that's it. And the eastbound, we actually missed it because we had Palo reservations that night. And so I did finally catch it on the westbound, but spoiler here, I caught it in the room because that was during the hurricane. But I have at least seen it now.
besides the Broadway shows, did they have any other entertainment on there that kind of stood out? Did they have some magicians, or what kind of, did you guys take into any of that at all?
On both Transatlantics, they bring on Broadway stars. On our Eastbound, it was Carol Lindsay and Kevin Massey. They're a married couple that both actually do Disney Broadway, and they did a main show. They'll have them do some of those, what do you call it, like the in-between dinner shows. Do those have a name? Like the 7:45 on the Transatlantics. They're, either between dinner and the big show time period. They would have them do like mini shows. On our Eastbound, they had Danny Buckler, who's a magician who was hysterical. We, I think, went and tried to catch every one of his shows. He does some improv magic, so you never knew what was going to happen during his show, which was great because everyone was different. And they had a magician and a hypnotist on the Westbound. They had, I think on both, they had Junked. Is that how you say it? They're really popular. The Transatlantic cruise,
yeah, the ones that like hit the garbage cans and stuff.
Yeah. Interestingly, the Transatlantics are majority, not completely, but majority are platinum and gold members. And so they're, I guess, picky because they've seen it all. So the entertainment at least feels like they bring on the best of the best to keep people happy for the week that they're at sea. They do stuff during the day, like they do on the longer cruises too. But, because these are longer, we get crew hide and go seek, where you have to go try and find the crew who's dressed in different costumes. They do cheese tasting and oil and vinegar tasting seminars, which are all complimentary. They do the character breakfast that you get on the 7-night and longer cruises that you just have to sign up for ahead of time. They do, for the kids club, they do a nighttime sleepover where the kids actually stay in the club overnight. Oh, one thing that was really cool that I've only seen on the Transatlantics, obviously, they did not do this on Alaska. They do adult only times in the kids club. So after like 10 p.m., they open up one of the kids clubs almost every night, and you can go do kid stuff in the kids clubs as an adult.
That's awesome. They do that on as well as the sleepover on the Panama Canal cruise too.
Yeah, so I think probably the entertainment between the Panama Canal and the Transatlantic is similar in that sense. It's, we were never bored. There's tons of trivia during the day, tons of lectures. They would have some guest lectures on. We had on the Eastbound Ridley Pearson, who is the author of the Kingdom Keepers book series. And so he did, I think, almost every day, he had a lecture on writing books, what it's like, writing workshops, how to be a better writer. On the Westbound, we actually had the voice of Mickey Mouse on our cruise. He did shows about, like what it's like to voice Mickey Mouse. He did some art classes on how to draw Mickey Mouse. They do a lot of drawing classes during these Transatlantics. They have dance lessons, and they sort of theme them to where you're at. So the Eastbound was a lot of Spanish dancing, and the Westbound there was some kind of traditional ballroom sort of stuff. And then they did some Irish dancing lessons. I did not go, not a dancer, but you kind of, as you're going through everything, you see what's going on for the day. And I remember seeing that one. And then like their people that they bring on for the extra music acts are usually themed to where you're going. So we got Spanish music and we got Irish music on the Westbound.
So a lot of different variety then, to fill those days, like you said, with a lot of different entertainment, especially people, if you get a lot of golds and platinums that are interested in seeing something maybe a little bit different. I like the fact that they add, people like Ridley Pearson on there to give lectures. It kind of really gives you like a broader insight into like just the whole Disney company and things surrounding it. I know Jeff Curdy, I think, has been on. He's an author as well. He's done a couple of these Transatlantics, so I love that. Plus the entertainers that they bring on as well. Well, let's turn to the ports then, and we don't really have time to do each port individually, but can you talk about maybe some of the highlights on the Eastbound one, some of the places you enjoyed, and the differences between that and the Westbound?
Sure. So ones we enjoyed, every single one of them, which, as we talked about, I did not expect to. But I think for me, Lisbon was just amazing. We didn't book through Disney. What we had kind of researched ahead of time. I'm a big planner. And what we wanted to do, Disney didn't really do other than kind of as a brief drive-by. But we wanted to go to, and I apologize, I'm going to give you these names and the Spanish names because as I did all my research, I learned them that way, and I don't know the English names. But the Geronimus Monastery, so it's a just gorgeous, gorgeous monastery that you can go all in and tour, and it's a huge highlight. And Tower de Belém, which I think the English is Belém Tower, which both of these were like Ferdinand and Isabella, Christopher Columbus time period stuff. And so that was the two things we really wanted to see. And Disney doesn't do like really extensive going in them. They sort of just go by them. And so we just used a taxi in Lisbon and sort of went on our own.
That's a good point. We don't really talk about port stuff as much. Christy, do you have any advice for people? And I'll ask you too, Lauren. Where did you do your research for people that maybe can't find what they want to do through Disney? What were some of the resources you used? And Christy, do you have any thoughts on that?
What I recommend to people, and when I did my own European cruises and trips to Europe, I love books. I actually love Rick Steves. You've talked about him before, but he has a Mediterranean port book and he has some other European city books, and you can actually learn how to navigate those cities on your own. So like when we went to Naples, for example, we used Rick Steves' books. It basically told you where the train station is located. It almost says when you get off the train, you walk to this location. So we were able to do that. And when we went to Paris a few years ago, we picked up a couple of other tour books, and you can get them from your library. So it's not even a book that you have to pay for forever. I mean, if you'd like to pay for it, go ahead. But if you want to be more cost conscious, or if you're only going to use it for one time, borrow them from your library and then look through and see what the highlights were. When we went to Paris, I had a 18-month-old, and it was a very short stay, and it was before my husband had to go for a work trip there. And we were super busy. I was busy at work. He was busy. We literally brought our tour books onto the airplane and planned out our Paris trip and what we were going to see and how we were going to get there and what we were going to do on the plane, because that was the time we had to do it. But we used the travel books to be able to help us do that.
And Lauren, what did you use, or how did you plan for it?
Like Christy, I go to my library and check out every single book they have on where I'm going. And that's usually, honestly, they've got a great variety, at least for us. I use Rick Steves. I use Eyewitness Travel. I've used a couple other ones. And then Google, the internet. Like once I sort of have an idea of what looks interesting in that port, I kind of dive into the internet, and Google Translate is your friend.
Mm-hmm. And that is huge in general, Google in general. And you could do that if you have a food allergy and you're going to another country and you're trying to figure out where to eat, use Google. Somebody has probably written a blog about it.
Probably. And honestly, trip reports, we would read kind of what other people had done or how they did it, or, well, what do you do if you're in Lisbon and Disney doesn't work, and can you get a taxi, and do they speak English, and will we be able to get back to the ship? That sort of stuff. And so I just tried to pool it all into one big resource that's, multiple pages on my computer at this point.
I kind of want to give a shout out to just the taxi drivers in general. And I know that sounds kind of strange. I didn't really, the first time we did it was on our very first cruise when we were in Athens, and we got off, and I think it's pretty easy to do in a lot of the European port cities, at least, where there's taxis usually right out there. If somebody like you, Lauren, who has specific things that you want to go and see, you can use them to get you there. But in Athens, we just negotiated a rate with a taxi driver and said he was going to be ours for the day, and there was 4 of us traveling. He took the 4 of us, and he was like, well, these are the sites I recommend, and here's some out of the way places that most people don't go. And he just took us around, and it was amazing.
Yeah, no, our taxi driver in Lisbon on the way out was super helpful. He took us on some back side streets to avoid the traffic, told us all about, he spoke really, really good English, told us all about the city. You could tell he really loved Lisbon. And he gave us a tip that I think we would have been in trouble without, was he had us write down our port, where we were docked, because unbeknownst to us, there's 2 in Portugal, or in Lisbon, Portugal. And if we just told a taxi to take us back to port, they might have taken us to the one that was like a mile away from the ship. And so we had
a great tip.
Yeah, it was. We had no idea, which turned out to be even more helpful when we had to, jump in front of the street to grab a taxi, because grabbing a taxi in Lisbon outside of the cruise terminal was a harrowing adventure, because that taxi driver spoke no English, and we just were able to show him our little written thing that said, take us here, and we got back to the port, no problem. But I think if you're doing it on your own, you at least got to leave a little wiggle room on that all aboard time, because man, sure. I don't want to be left in somewhere, especially if you're on the beginning end of the transatlantic from the West Coast, because, that ship's going to go into sea and you can't get a plane out to it.
You can't catch it. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, and a note on what she was saying about Lauren was saying about writing down the port. You can use your phone and or writing down things on a piece of paper to help you if there's a language barrier with the person you're working with. When I was in Paris, I needed a plastic bag. It's very random. Like, our flight got canceled and I had to get home to actually care for my son that was at daycare or going to be at daycare that day that I needed to pick up. And my flight was delayed in New York. And so I knew I was going to make it. So, and because I'm celiac, I can't just eat food, and I couldn't pre-order a meal because we put me on a different plane. So I needed a plastic bag so I could put ice in it. So I put in my cell phone, how do you say plastic bag with ice or something in French? And I wrote it in, and it wrote the words up. I showed it to the cashier at this little store, and she was able to get me a plastic bag with ice, because that was not a conversation either of us were going to be able to have.
Yeah, you can't really mime that one.
No, a lot of things you can get by with different things, but plastic bag with ice was never happening. And so you can use, as long as you have the international option on your phone, you can use that to help navigate and get by as well when there is a language issue.
So I just wanted to circle back one last thing on the taxi drivers. Just make sure if you're going to use one out of the ports, if you're going to use one for the day, make sure you negotiate the price ahead of time.
Yes.
That just goes anywhere you go. I would, before you get in a cab anywhere you go. And I think even this, well, I don't know if in the States it works, but definitely overseas. We've been in Central America, South America before. Make sure you negotiate the price ahead of time. I think they do an awesome job. It's a little tougher if you've got younger kids. So obviously you don't have car seats over there a lot of times. So the buses and the Port Adventures through Disney probably work a little better if you have younger kids. Well, any other ports on the eastbound stick out to you, Lauren, before we turn to the westbound ones?
So I'm trying to remember, I think it was Cadiz, because we did 2 ports where we got off the ship and did a Disney adventure, but we had to drive really far in both. And I think it's Cadiz that goes to Seville, which is the largest Gothic cathedral outside of the Vatican. And Seville is a charming town. It's super cute. The cathedral was just jaw-dropping. I mean, I've been in other European cathedrals since, and I have never seen anything like Seville. I kind of explained it like it's multiple football fields going multiple directions, and you cannot see the ends of it's so big and so long, and it's tall, and it's been there. I want to say it was like the 1400s it was completed, 13 or 1400s. So it's really old, and you're going, how did they build this thing? And I think that was probably our other big highlight from all of the different ports on the transatlantic. But really every port we had a great time in and did something really cool. We got to go to a necropolis on that transatlantic. They were still going to Ibiza. And we got to go in a necropolis there. And Disney had contracted to basically let us still go into the active dig site. And what they didn't tell us till we were going in the active dig site was that meant crawling on your hands and knees to get through the holes. But it was so awesome, we didn't care. Most people sort of opted out once it got that low. But I mean, it was amazing to literally go into this active archaeological dig and be shown around by the archaeologist, crawling on your hands and knees with a hard hat and the whole deal.
Did it feel claustrophobic?
I'm not claustrophobic, but it probably would, yeah.
It is Cadiz that you would get to Seville. Seville. I can't say it. I could never say that town. Is it Seville?
I've heard it Seville. I've heard it Seville.
Yeah.
That town.
That town. But it is Cadiz where you can get to Seville or Sevilla, however you say it. Well, how about the westbound then as far as the ports go? You only have 2 ports I'm looking at from the one this year. Any thoughts on either one of those?
So we were supposed to have 4, but yet again, the hurricane sent us only to 2. But you start out in Dover, which is about 2 hours roughly by train south of London. And so we had done a couple of days in London before the cruise, which was kind of how we, I don't say justified, but worked in the, this was only a 10-day cruise, but because we could be gone 2 weeks, we could tack on 3 more days in London, which made it sort of convinced us to do this cruise and when we were kind of trying to decide. And so we did a bunch of stuff in London. And I think most people try to tack on a day or 2 there, sort of make it an early port adventure. Disney does do Adventures by Disney add-ons there. And they do even, I think they did like the day of port adventure for people to do London before you got on the cruise. And then we went down to Dover to the night before to board the ship and did Dover Castle, which I cannot recommend enough. It was absolutely amazing. It was worth, we did it the morning of boarding. And so we ran up to the castle at like 9:30 in the morning. It opens at 10. And we had chosen not to rush onto the ship because we really wanted to see Dover Castle, which was just crazy awesome.
And you had a few days on the ship, so you had some time to spare.
Yeah, and honestly, it turned out really good. I know I've heard tons of people talk about the fact that, boarding later can be really nice, and it really was. There was no lines, there was no, pushing, shoving, everybody trying to get on as fast as they can to change their Apollo reservations. And we just walked onto the ship. We could go right to the room and dump off our carry-on bags. There, the room was open and it was really nice. And so that was kind of what we did. I guess we counted that as a port day in a weird way pre getting on the ship because we wanted to see that castle and kind of worked it out. And I think that's something to consider for Dover is they don't leave. I think the all aboard is 4:00. If you're down there at 10, you can see the whole castle in roughly 4 hours.
So from there you have Portland and then Cork, Ireland. Any thoughts on either of those two ports?
Portland was great. I know a lot of people go and do Stonehenge at that port. We didn't. We just didn't really want to see rocks in a circle. So.
Oh, I've never heard it explained that way before. There you go.
And so Jason and I booked through Disney. When we book through Disney, we try to book things that Disney can do either special or better than we think, either another tour company or we can do on our own. And they had actually booked a private tour and tea of a manor house that is not open to the public. And so we got to go into this old manor house that was the Churchills, I don't know, like 150, 200 years ago, the Churchills' original manor house. And then we got to meet the Lord. He kind of talked about the house and the history. And it's strange because this isn't a tour house. So there's no ropes and there's no barriers. And basically the whole first floor is yours to enjoy and explore. And they're like, oh, sit on the furniture, sit on the couch. So you're sitting on this couch. I don't know how old this couch was, but you're looking at some painting that is obviously from like 1825 and you're just sitting on their couch enjoying their living room. And it was really like, if you like English and manor houses and the Downton Abbeys, it was really cool to just sort of have free access for, I don't know, I think it was 3 or 4 hours. And you could go walk through their gardens. And then they did a cream tea. So, I mean, if you're in England, you got to do at least one cream tea.
And then how about Cork? Any thoughts on Cork, Ireland?
So Cork on this cruise specifically turned out to be sort of a hot mess for Disney. I know a lot of people weren't really happy. What happened was Cork has exactly one port in Cove, which is where you port into. It's Cove, Ireland. That port was already taken with a ship. And so Disney had gotten sort of bumped to the secondary dock, which is 30 minutes by car away from Cove. And so it was Rings a Kitty. And that's not typical for them. And there was a lot of people really unhappy because Cove is gorgeous. We did end up in Cove because you get off the ship and you're right downtown. It's literally like, it looked like what I imagine a river cruise looked like because you pull up and you step off your ship and you're literally in the middle of the shopping and historic district. There's no path. It's right there. And so Rings a Kitty was a struggle because it's industrial and it's 30 minutes away from anything. And there's no real way to get to anything. So I know a lot of people were really sort of frustrated with Disney on that because you had to try to either get into Cork or most people want to go to Cove. That's sort of the main draw there. And that's actually where the last port, the Titanic, was in. And so there's a lot of Titanic history there. There's also, from there, you can easily get to the Jameson Distillery, which, if you're into whiskey, is a huge Irish whiskey distillery. It was really a struggle from what we heard. Luckily, I had found out about Disney's change to Rings a Kitty months and months before, and we ended up booking a private car, which was a lifesaver because it allowed us to go up to Middleton and the distillery and down to Cove for the afternoon. And we had a great driver who took us to a bunch of places along the route that Disney doesn't go. So we got to see the beach, which was really pretty, and an old monastery tower that's just literally in the middle of town in Ireland, but it's been there forever and ever and ever. And he took us on the one road that all the the immigrants would take before they got on the ships to leave Ireland during the mass exodus. And so we just got to do a whole bunch of cool stuff that way. But I know for a lot of people, Rings of Kitty was kind of a really rough port.
And Disney didn't provide a transportation to get to
I mean, if you had a port adventure, be honest, they did not provide transportation to Cove, which is where everybody wanted to go. I think there might have been a van. I don't know if it took you all the way into Cork or just to the train that took you to Cork. Once we had booked a car, I stopped looking into it. But I really talked with, a lot of people on the cruise, and one person said they almost considered canceling the cruise just because of not being able to get off and go into Cove. We didn't feel like it was any reason to cancel for us. We did really want to go to Cove, which is why we ended up booking a private driver ourselves and not through Disney at all either.
And where did you find your private driver?
The internet. I researched a bunch of different companies that are in the area that do them, and I emailed probably 7 or 8 companies and heard back from 2 or 3, got some price quotes, and one just kind of stood out. It was one guy who does it kind of as I don't want to say a side job. He's semi-retired and just does, driving around in a really nice town car and does sort of, I don't say tours, but, he's really knowledgeable and loves to talk about his country. And so we ended up really loving him, but it was just the internet because there's really not a whole lot of resources. Luckily, these are all in English because in Ireland, the main language spoken is still English, even though, interestingly, we found out on the tour that all the road signs and all the signs are also in Gaelic because that's the national language, but almost nobody speaks it.
Kind of looking at the end of this cruise, too, with those 2 ports, you guys pull into New York, and you actually have a night in New York. So that's kind of a nice tip or touch there that they add so that you can actually, you've got a hotel room built in with the ship there so you can go see New York City as well at the end.
Yeah, that was not intentional.
It wasn't? Okay.
No.
That was Hurricane.
That was Hurricane Humberto's. That was basically their backup plan.
Okay, well, let's talk about the hurricane quick, and then we'll kind of wrap things up.
Sure. So I think this is the main reason to have trip insurance, because this hurricane was not really on the radars. I don't know if it was right before we left, but by the time we got on the ship, I think it had sort of developed between when we left home and, when we first boarded in Dover. Honestly, we don't kind of pay attention to the news. And so we didn't know there was anything going on until our first sea day. So it would have been the day after Cove. They came on during the nighttime, like the main show beforehand, and said, we need to make an announcement. And they did a really good job, honestly, because I think if they had just said, hey, there's a hurricane, we have to change, people would have been mad. But they pulled up the radar and they showed us this massive hurricane, exactly where we had to go to get to Halifax and Sydney, Nova Scotia, which was our next 2 ports. And they said, look, there's no way. Nobody wants to go through that. We don't want to put anybody in danger. It's going to be pretty miserable. So we're going to change our course and we're going to go south. And that was kind of where they left it at that point. And then they kind of warned us that the seas might be choppy. I think that warning was warranted and maybe even not enough, because by Friday, I have never been seasick. I do not get seasick. And by Friday, I woke up and it was a bad morning. It was so bad that I had to call health services and, report some seasickness, because you're supposed to report those things on the ship. And I said, is there anything you need to do? And the guy who answered was really kind, but it just goes, yeah, our phones will not stop ringing. The entire ship is sick.
No.
I mean, it was the roughest seas I've ever been in. Obviously, I think Alaska and the eastbound were pretty smooth, but this was off the charts. We have a video where if you go on deck, I think it's 3 down by the clubs, and they have those giant portholes. Jason went down, because I was not moving around the ship, and took a video where the waves are splashing up as the ship rolls over 2/3 of those portholes, like just covering them. And so they made the call to end up going really south. We went only, I think they said 500 miles from the Azores. So we were basically at that point on the same route as our eastbound was. And so Friday and Saturday on that cruise were pretty rough for people. I think a majority of the ship stayed in their cabins and just sort of hung out. By Sunday, it was a lot clearer, and they had sort of let us know, I think somewhere in that Friday, Saturday, I was not fully conscious during those 2 days, that we would be getting an extra night in New York. And so we were going to miss our ports, but they would pull into New York a day early and then overnight in New York. Sort of as basically because they were going to be there early, and it sort of made up for all of the lack of ports, because otherwise we would have had 2 ports. For us, it was a bonus, honestly. I mean, other than the seasickness, I could have done without that. But we love New York, an extra night in New York, staying on the ship with the best view of Manhattan possible. We got those 6 sea days we always like. 2 of them were rough, but we did get them.
Where did the trip insurance come into play?
Well, if this hurricane had diverted us where we didn't land in New York, which was a possibility at the very beginning, this was somewhere that I was very glad to have it. It did play in for at least one person on our ship, though, because we heard the rumors. It was never confirmed, but it was kind of the scuttlebutt all over the ship that somebody didn't make the ship in Cove.
Oh.
They missed the ship, which is bad, but at that point, we did not know there was a hurricane issue, and you would have tried to get to, they missed the ship, and just like all the transatlantics, they take your passport at the beginning and don't give it back to you till later in the cruise. So he got off without a passport, she.
Oh my God.
No passport, all your clothes, all your medicines, your toothbrush, everything is in the ship. And now they have 4 days before they get to Canada. So if you're trying to meet up with the ship in Canada to get all your stuff back, well, guess what? Now it's not going to Canada either, because they changed it halfway through those sea days to send you down to New York. And everybody was talking about, you just sort of referred to him as a guy we don't know, but this person must have just panicked, because you're like, okay, well, I'll miss my 4 sea days, but at least I'll catch it back in Canada. And no.
Could you imagine, if it was one spouse that said, let's do this, and then the other spouse is like, what did you do to us?
Oh, man. I've heard stories. There's always those rumors on the ship of the people who they've heard of people getting lost, but apparently it really did happen on this ship. And I was like, could not have been worse. But yeah, there was a real possibility at the very beginning that we weren't even going to get to New York if the hurricane, turned just right and hit it when we were going to be there. And they could have, they could have had to take us to Miami. And obviously having trip insurance to get you back home, because your flight or your plans would have been out of New York City, was absolutely, I felt pretty comfortable at that point, knowing that whatever happened, we were going to get to land at some point. But at least I had a way to get home eventually.
Oh, those are good points.
I wanted to talk about one other thing about the hurricane, which sort of became apparent 2 or 3 days before we hit New York, was they had planned on restocking food in Canada. And really, Disney did a great job. I don't think most people even noticed, but they did start running out of some staples. The one that most people noticed was there
Mickey
was no
waffles.
more Coke. No, I think there was still Mickey waffles.
Sorry, I had to throw that in there. Go ahead.
But they ran out of Coke Zero. That was the one I think that was the most noticeable, because all the, the soda machines no longer had Coke Zero. It was just out. And they ran out of berries. Strawberries, blueberries, the fresh stuff that, you put enough on to get you through your 4 sea days. And the reason this became apparent is half the desserts have berries on them. And we went to an Anyone Can Cook that was supposed to have a dessert they made with berries. And as Jason put it, he says, they put the 2 smallest blueberries I've ever seen in my life on the dessert and called it a berry compote. I mean, it just wasn't. But yeah, if you're at sea a couple extra days, there was more than enough food. No one was going to starve, but something you might enjoy might not be on the ship at the end of that sort of hurricane experience. But overall, I think Disney did a great job. They came up with tons of extra entertainment on these sea days. It barely felt like they didn't have this already planned. It was really unnoticeable.
I'm sure they have some pretty good contingency plans when things change up, whether they, days where they can't make a port, like when they try to dock at Castaway Cay and it's too windy or something like that, to add that, some of those extra touches for people. So good on you, Lauren, too, for having such a good, unfortunately you guys had that hurricane you had to go around and some rough sea days, but good on you for, kind of rolling with the punches. That's just part of traveling. I have one question about it, because my son got sick on our trip over spring break. And so he had to go down to the health office to get cleared before he could go into Castaway Cay. Did they do anything like that for you guys? Did you have to get cleared before you did anything? Or just out of curiosity, since you contacted them?
No,
it sounded like half the ship was sick anyway, so I was just kind of curious if they had you guys do anything, because he could not leave the ship until he was cleared to go down to Castaway Cay.
Well, I did the responsible thing. I called them and told them what was happening, and Jason wasn't sick, and I was the one who was sick, and I said, do I need to do anything? And they go, there's a bowl down by health services or at guest services, and you can come pick up some medication. And he goes, and that's it. He goes, try to survive. the 2 days and see you on the other side. And no, I didn't have to go get cleared. And eventually I went, and by the second day I went and picked up the medication, and it looked like a trick-or-treat bowl full of meclizine.
Disney can tell if the seas are rough and if everybody's having upper GI issues versus lower GI issues. The lower GI issues are obviously where they need to worry about norovirus and things like that could be contagious and spread through the ship. But if there is a one-off where the person is otherwise non-feverish, doesn't have a fever, otherwise feeling good, but just the nausea from the rocking seas, they know if it's rough. So they'll be able to determine, at least offhand, if the seas are rough and they're getting a bunch of calls and everybody's just saying upper GI, that is clearly a seasickness issue versus a norovirus issue.
That's a good point,
yeah.
Christy.
Yeah, I think they just sort of assumed at that point that we were all just suffering from the severe rocking of the ship, which I guess everybody was, because, I didn't hear about any outbreaks or anything on the ship, so.
Well, as we kind of finish up here, you had, I know when you emailed me about doing this trip report, you had some thoughts about disembarkation and anything that we haven't touched on yet that you want to talk about, Lauren.
Sure. So a couple of things. One is go ahead, and if you don't get Apollo brunch reservation, especially I would say on this westbound cruise because of the weather. I think the year before they had the same problem with this cruise. It missed Canada due to the hurricane. It seems to be a relatively common occurrence. Go ahead and get on that Apollo wait list. We did not get a Apollo brunch reservation before the cruise. We're only Silver Castaway Club members, and so that just wasn't happening. But we really wanted to do Apollo brunch on this cruise, and we got on the wait list, and Jason went and did it. He says when he signed up to get on the wait list, the guy just looked at him like, that's not going to happen in a million years, but go ahead and put your name down. Well, lo and behold, we ended up with multiple extra sea days due to the hurricane. And we got our Apollo brunch. So that's one of those things that, go ahead and put your name on the list. It may or may not happen. But I think on this westbound, it's worth, adding your name to that because they were able to fulfill everybody on the wait list because they had, I think, 2 extra sea days that they weren't planning on that they ended up doing the Apollo brunch for. And then debarkation in the eastbound is pretty standard. You get off in Barcelona. You've already gone through customs because it's in the EU. And so you just get off the ship and grab your bags and go. New York City, on the other hand, you have to go through customs. And it's the same customs that you would go through at an airport. And so imagine that process at the port and how long that can take. And so it was about an hour. And we were getting off a day before we had planned to. But I cannot imagine what that would be like if you're trying to run and catch a flight, because it took them almost roughly an hour from when we started to when we exited the ship completely, or, got through customs and out into New York City.
And then how did you get to the airport? Did you stay another night there in New York City, or how did you get to the airport? Just out of curiosity for people.
When we did the debarkation, you actually do the unofficial debarkation going through customs that day before because of the cruise. But normally you would do that. And then we stayed for the day in New York. We love New York City. Jason spent a ton of time there, so it's basically like having a local show us around. So we weren't really too stressed about being in New York at all. But we just ended up we stored our luggage in downtown New York for the day at a luggage storage company, and then toured all around New York, saw some of our favorite sites, some of the cool stuff we like to do, and then took a taxi to the airport. Well,
Lauren, just 2 amazing cruises. I wish I could do this because I kind of I would love to do like just a cruising experiment with you and Jason, and I would love to like get a camera and then put you guys on a 3-day cruise and just see how you survive.
I don't think we would.
Kind of like a little reality show going from, the 7-night to the 13 to the 10 to welcome to your 3-day cruise, or maybe even the 2-day out of San Diego.
No, I think we've determined that anything less than 7 days isn't worth the time. And other than going out of San Diego on the West Coast, you're hauling all the way to the East Coast or to Europe to get the ship. And so if you're going to do that, you might as well go for at least 7 days.
Yeah, no, I'm just teasing you a little bit. So I hope that's okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, what's next for you guys then? You've had these like long, are you looking at that Panama Canal cruise? There was a 9-day to Hawaii, which I know that one filled up pretty fast, but they have popped up. There's been some cabins that have popped up recently. So there's a possibility of doing that. But what are you guys looking at?
So we never leave the ship without either a cruise booked or a placeholder booked, but we always keep it a secret until we finish that cruise. So we do have one, but we're just not ready to tell anyone where we're going just yet. But it'll be as epic, as amazing as the last 3 we've done for sure. We're not the Caribbean cruisers, so we go some of the kind of unique and cool places.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Lauren, thank you so much. Look, and for those of you on those longer cruises, look for Lauren and Jason. They'll be out and about at that berry compote, how to cook classes and stuff like that. But no, seriously, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your experiences. These are one of those cruises that I think, and Christy, I think you guys would love to do it at some point when we can. And it's just so great to get your feedback and your experiences for those who may be planning an east or westbound transatlantic here in the year to come.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking about it. One of the best parts about vacation is talking about it afterwards with people who share the passion and, kind of really enjoy the same thing you've been doing. All
right. Well, drop us a note when you get back from that cruise, and it'll be like
the
Christmas.
Secret cruise.
Exactly. It'll be just like Christmas. I don't want you to tell me where you went. Just tell me that you're back, and we'll find out where you went.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Lauren for coming on and sharing her and her husband's experiences cruising in the transatlantic, not just eastbound, but westbound. Just a lot of good information there. What about those time zones? That's something that I think we all think about, or one of those things that maybe you don't think about, but is a huge reality and a factor of sailing on those transatlantic cruises. That being said, I think our family would still love to do it someday. So I'd like to give a special shout out this episode to Amita and her 2 daughters. I hope I said that right, who are listeners to our podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you. And I thought it'd be fun to give them a shout out for listening as well. And I really want to give you huge thanks. We're going to talk about this on an upcoming episode, but I really want to give you huge thanks for all of you who've gone out and given iTunes reviews lately. We've got just a bunch of them in lately. That really helps us get the show noticed, and it helps kind of drive the ratings in the Apple podcast kind of genre out there. So it helps other people find us, and it helps us grow the show. So thank you for all of you who have done that recently. And if you have a chance to do that, we sure would appreciate it if you take the time to do it as well. If you would like to get a hold of us and come on our show, you can always reach out to me, Steve, at dclpodcast.com. Give me a shout, and we'll try and get you lined up just as quickly as you can so that you can share your memories sailing with Disney Cruise Line, traveling with Adventures by Disney, or maybe even running in one of those Run Disney races. So between now and our next show, if you are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on that next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast. The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.